The grooming gang scandal is arguably the worst to happen in recent British history. It represents the failure of authorities to protect the most innocent amongst us, and that's our children. It also represents the corruption of our law enforcement in England and across the UK, while highlighting the detrimental effects of unsuccessful cultural integration and immigration policies that drastically impacts social cohesion. While the grooming gang scandal has been known about for over a decade now, it hasn't really fully gained traction as much as today. Most truly didn't understand the level of corruption and negligence involved by British authorities. Not only that, but it seems there's likely a cover-up as well. And for those that don't know what the grooming gang scandal is, I'll explain. The grooming gang scandal was a series of criminal cases where groups of mostly Pakistani Muslim men sexually exploited vulnerable young girls over a couple of decades. These cases gained widespread attention across the UK, specifically in towns like Rochdale, Rotherham, Oldham and Telford, as the victims of these awful crimes didn't just speak about the abhorrent nature that they were treated by the criminals, but how they were treated by authorities and law enforcement as well. They went to the police for help, only to be met with hostility, some even getting arrested. The victims were not only gaslit and ignored by authorities, but some were even criminalised for speaking out. There were fathers of these young girls that were arrested for going to the police and trying to get some help. All the while, the police were giving tip-offs to the grooming gangs themselves. The level of corruption of this magnitude has never been seen in Great Britain out in the open before, with such horrific crimes affecting upwards of 250,000 young girls, children, across the entire country.
There appear to have been upwards of 250,000 young white girls raped in this century, very largely by Muslim men. And given these girls are usually raped several times a day for years, so, my lords, what is the government's answer to the Chief Constable of Northumberland, of Northumbria, who has just said that there is every likelihood that these grooming gangs are operating in every one of our major cities? So, my lords, what is the government doing to prosecute those in authority who turned a blind eye to all this because they were afraid of being Islamophobic and so on? And what is it doing to compensate and help these victims mentally?
All the while, our politicians, authorities and law enforcement turned a blind eye and even enabled what was going on. They allowed the gangs to continue their abuse of the most vulnerable of society, claiming it was the sake of diversity and fears of being called a racist. But the matter seems deeper than that. These were young children who were abused at the hands of monsters, and the stories of what happened to them too heavy for most to stomach, oftentimes by multiple men at the same time. All the while they were helpless as authorities sat idly and let it happen.
I was in a flat with nothing in the corner of a room, chained up naked. I was trapped like a dog, and I tried to fight back. I tried to run down the stairs. I got away. I tried to run downstairs, and I fell. And the top of the stairs just stood laughing, and you just live that evil laugh then all the time. And I realised that when you argue back, that's when more's going to happen to you.
How do you, as a child, get your head round what's happening? How do you stay alive, basically?
You don't, because you're that drugged. You don't. You can't even acknowledge half of the people coming in the room. You just don't know, you're just out of it. It was like I was drugged once and I was in the corner of a room naked, but I felt like I could see myself in the corner. It's so, you're so drugged that you can't process any thoughts really apart from get me home out, like I want to be alive.
That was Ellie Reynolds' story, one of the many girls that were the victims of the grooming gangs, rape and abuse of children involving 3 brothers that targeted young girls during 1996 and 2010. They would groom these girls from the age of 6 and 7, plying them with gifts of alcohol and cigarettes in order to gain their trust, eventually leading them to be drugged and chained while being constantly abused. When Ellie tried to seek justice for what she had endured, Cumbria Police had submitted the evidence to the Crown Prosecution Service. She then received this letter of damnation back. The defence would have suggested to the jury that you have made up the report of rape in an attempt to excuse your criminality in the commission of blackmail. And that was sent on the 25th of June 2019.
And that came through the CPS letter saying there would be no further action. What did you feel?
Well, the CID, I ripped it up in front of him. I ripped it up, and they might as well have just killed me then, because it was like, now the men know that I have reported it. Now I have no protection, and they're coming for me. They're going to kill me. That's the first thing I thought. They're going to kill me.
This letter itself shows that the CPS does not care about the victims of these horrific crimes, with law enforcement constantly serving hollow platitudes that does nothing to help them. Ellie's case is just one of tens of thousands of girls up and down the country that have suffered at the hands of these sick people.
But having gone to the police unsuccessfully, Ellie is right to be afraid. From a Facebook account later found to be hacked, Ellie is constantly called a slag. Then, I raped you. You can't do. Maybe I'll come to your house. I'll kidnap you. The police won't do anything. You girls are idiots.
There's not just the fear factor, which must have been enormous, that they knew that you'd gone to the police, but the fact that they didn't believe you, or that suggests that they didn't believe you. What was that like after everything you'd been through and after taking that decision to go to the police?
I felt like, what was the point? What was the point? I might as well have just not said anything.
This is a clip from one of the episodes of Trigonometry, in which the hosts interview one of the victims of the scandal, where she explains what took place when she was abused and when she went to authorities.
The stuff you're saying it to our faces now, and I literally cannot believe the things you're telling me. You went to the police 5 times with physical wounds and evidence saying that this man was abusing you in this way, and the police said there's nothing we can do. Like, I don't think there's anyone who's listening to this or watching this who could conceive of that being true, even though we know that it is.
Yeah, it's true, yeah. A lot of it's to do with race and religion, which a lot of people don't really like talking about, and they don't like to hear it. But this is why I feel compelled to talk about what's happened and what is still happening, because people need to hear it from survivors that these are racially and religiously aggravated crimes. That when I was being beaten, I was being called a white slag, a white whore, a white cunt. That over and over again, the references to my whiteness was always at the forefront of my perpetrator's mind.
Quite clearly, there is a religious and cultural motivation for these crimes. It almost seems like there's a war on those that aren't Muslims and were conducted by extremists. Some entire gangs consisted of family members. These poor children were the victims of a senseless and violent atrocity that pinned them as the primary target of their sick and twisted game of power.
So, but in the minds of these grooming gangs, if you're not covered down to your ankles, down to your wrists, if the hem of your top doesn't cover to your knees, then you're asking to be raped. Make hatred of white people a justification for what they're doing. And also scriptural things like, we're allowed to do this, we're permitted to do this to you once you've started your periods.
The story has gained traction as X has recently gone into a frenzy about this infamous scandal that has plagued a once great country. Even the likes of J.K. Rowling has had her say on the matter on X, formerly known as Twitter, stating that the corruption of policing in the UK and the failure to protect young girls from harm of sick and twisted men. While this has been spoken about for a while by activists like Tommy Robinson, Julie Bindel, Douglas Murray, you may ask why all this is important. Well, it turns out that the current British Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, was the head of the Crown Prosecution Service at the time that these prosecutions were taking place. And the current Labour government in power are rejecting calls for a public inquiry into the scandal, implying a guilty part in this matter that has affected tens of thousands of young girls. This reveals the abhorrent corruption of not just law enforcement, but to the height of government itself. If it came out that one of the reasons authorities rejected investigating the scandal was because of the current PM himself, all hell would break loose. The problem now resides in where we go from here, whether there will be an inquiry into what had taken place, and where we go as a society to deal with crimes as bad as these. And while most bury their head in the sand, it seems the discussion has been revived as tensions of immigration has exponentially grown, not just in the UK but Canada and America as well. The failure to acknowledge who these groups are is leading to a countrywide frustration. There's a lot to learn from this scandal, and it's going to take a lot from the authorities and officials that run the country to regain the trust of the public. But I think Britain can get there.